Coach Gouline, you are the most requested guest. I've gotten texts and emails from people, and they're all like, all right, you've done 25 episodes of the Path to Fall podcast. Where's Coach Goo?
Well, I'm glad I can make it. I hope I can live up to the anticipation.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you in. We've been trying to schedule for a little bit now, but You're a busy man. You're hard to nail down.
Well, and it's been, just a crazy year, right?
Yeah.
But, glad to be here.
Yeah. How's math class going? I always see you on the second floor, Cary Hall, doing some tutoring and some extra work with guys, right?
Yes.
Is that what you're doing there?
Yeah, sort of like a hybrid math lab, right? So we used to have it upstairs in the little smelly room, but we'd be way over capacity. I think there are like 3 people allowed in there now. So kind of do it out in the open and have kids working in person and some kids at home. And it is a very sort of like 2020, 2021 school year activity. But it's, it's just great to connect with people. And I think also, particularly with kids being home so much, I think they need more kind of one-on-one assistance. It's pretty hard to learn through a screen. I think even if you've got a really good teacher and you're a really good student, so I'm just glad to be able to help those guys out.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to my time in high school. I think I went into the math tutor, we had a little, kind of a room like this almost. And it was where the math tutor, she didn't teach there, Miss Roche.
Okay.
She didn't teach there at all, but she was just there for extra help. And I think I went in there every day because math was my bane of my existence.
Oh, really?
Oh, it was very hard. I mean, I got through and I did pretty well in it, but it was because I went to Miss Roche every day. Yeah.
Well, we have all sorts of kids. I mean, we've got really, really strong students coming too, and then some guys that are struggling. And I think one of the things kind of institutionally we're trying to emphasize is that, coming in for help, doesn't necessarily mean you're a weak student or even really that you're struggling, right? I think a lot of times it's just, trying to get some clarification or sometimes talking through what's going on is really helpful. And some people just looking for things to do in the afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, I was saying the other day, like some of my classes aren't completely full right now. Like I'll have a couple guys in there and everyone else is at home, and I'm like, well, don't you guys want to come into school and at least have face-to-face interactions and get out of your room and leave the house? I mean, even though it's not normal and we're not in class and seeing people all the time, I at least see you in the hallway and say, hey, hello, and have a 5-minute conversation, something.
Yeah, I think maybe the hardest thing to reproduce is that 10 minutes before class and then 10 minutes after class, right? Where it's not so much content driven, but really it's just catching up with people, right? That aren't close enough friends that I would call out of the blue, right? And I think about teachers too, and I think about kids with each other. It's that like second layer of friendship that I think is really struggling. I think people are keeping pretty close tabs on their like inner circle of friends, but the people that they run into casually, the people that they see at lunch, and are happy to see, the people that they're excited, because they've got math class together and they always, and their class after that's together and they always walk to Bryn Mawr. The two of them, I think that we're missing a lot of, and that's been really hard to find sort of a surrogate for, right? We can like simulate math class and we can simulate, the one-to-one conversations, but it's much harder to simulate those sorts of things. And I think there's a loss there. I certainly feel it personally. I know the kids do.
For sure. How are you designing your classes and making math? And what are those classes, by the way, that you teach?
Yeah, so I'm teaching Algebra 2, which is freshmen, and then Pre-Calculus, which is juniors.
Okay, so Algebra 2 and Pre-Calculus. How are you designing your classes so that it works during COVID? Because for English, for me, I actually feel like I'm pretty lucky to teach a humanities course because I get all my kids on Zoom and we can still talk about the reading and the book and the characters as we would. It's not as fun, obviously, and, we're not looking at each other and we're not in the same room, but we can still do it. Math, I think, and science are a little bit more difficult in my mind.
Yeah, so I think the first thing for me, at least, is not pretending things are normal, right? So just to recognize, just sort of as an axiomatic statement, right? Things are not normal, and so I'm not going to just try to teach the way I would normally, right? That's just not going to work. So what I've done is I've created for each lesson an asynchronous module. So basically, it's about one page, and it looks like what their notes would have looked like in a normal time. So it's got different topics, and it's got different practice questions, and I've made videos for each of the practice questions, sort of, 90-second videos explaining how to do it that are linked into the page, right? So that one option, the kids who are at home can basically check in for maybe the first 5 minutes or so of class, make sure they're connected, make sure that we have a chance to talk, make sure they remember that this is not just me, that I'm part of a group. And then if they want, they can sort of log off and do those questions or do that work on their own. The freshmen aren't learning that way. That's just not sort of in their comfort zone, but some of the juniors are. For the first maybe like 40 or 50 minutes, sort of focus on like what are the most important things in this lesson, and more kind of lecture-y than I would have been in kind of a normal world, but just trying to make sure that we get through sort of the important pieces of what that lesson would be. Mm-hmm. And then the people who were at home, I kick them off Zoom with probably about 20 or 25 minutes left in class. They've got some work they can do kind of on their own at home. And then I can spend that time with the kids who are physically in the room, really focused on giving them the kind of personal attention that frankly they deserve. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to give when you're trying to juggle, the kind of in the flesh kids right in front of you, also with the people who are at home. And so there's kind of three different layers. And the nice thing is, when they're doing their homework, if they don't know how to do something, they can look it up. And it's fairly easy for them actually to find a similar question, watch this quick video. And most of the time that's enough for them to sort of figure out what they need. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've been trying to do the same thing with my English classes, in that I didn't do as much in the first semester because I was trying to balance the hybrid. Yeah. And class would be, similar to what it typically would be, just in a funky situation with 10 kids on Zoom and 4 kids in front of me. Yeah. But now I'm thinking, these 4 kids, they've come to school. They're here in the flesh. And they don't get much personal interaction. So for 10, 15, 20 minutes, give the Zoom guys something to do and just interact. Even if it's, even if it has less to do with English, it's just being in the same room and learning from each other about whatever.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, a huge part of our job, especially right now, right, is not just teaching kids math, but supporting them personally and emotionally in a time it's hard for everybody, but it's especially hard for some of them. And that I think that maybe our probably our more important role is making sure that they're as healthy mm-hmm. personally and emotionally as we can make them. Because this, if you're not right, you can't learn math and you can't learn English, and all those other things can't happen. So that's got to be sort of making the student feel comfortable and welcome and safe and supported and connected has to be a precursor to all those sort of content-based things that really are important to us, but that you can't do until you've sort of established that baseline.
Mm-hmm. And I think when you're in high school, you're not as aware of the importance of that, maybe, as like for me, I understand, and I'm sure the same is for you. You understand that you need to get your run in every day. You need to go outside and you need to do yoga or whatever it is that you do. When you're in high school, it's like you might just wake up, roll out of bed, 5 minutes before class, jump on your Zoom, do your 3 classes that are 80 minutes each, go downstairs, eat lunch, come back up, do your homework in front of the screen. When that's over, you go on your phone, you go on Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, you're on your screen, and then maybe you watch some TV at night. That's a lot of time. It's not healthy.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things is learning to see school as more than completing a series of tasks. And this was something really I struggled with, certainly when I was in high school, is you've got this like checklist of things you need to do, right? I've got my math homework, and then I've got, English vocab, and then I've got my reading, and then I've got my history time, right? And all these things, and just spend my day trying to just literally go through the list and check things off, rather than being engaged in sort of a deeper learning. And I think part of our job as teachers is to get them past that, right? Because that's natural, I think. And certainly you think about Canvas, the first thing they see when they log in is a to-do list. Mm-hmm. But like homework 30 that's not a learning objective, right? That's an assignment that's due in class tomorrow, right? And the learning objectives are deeper, and as much as we can, we've got to push them into that deeper learning, and so much of that is creating a personal connection with the students. Certainly as a 17-year-old, I was working way harder in classes when I felt connected to the teacher, and some of them were super friendly, and some of them were not. But I felt like there was something there. They cared more than what's his grade going to be in history class, mm-hmm. and that made me work really hard, and that made me learn in ways that I didn't with teachers that were more kind of like superficial, and that were doing their own sort of teacher checklist, right? So mm-hmm. like, I'm supposed to give 3 tests. I'm supposed to collect 6 homeworks. I'm supposed to write comments, twice each year. I think when teachers approach their work in that checklist fashion, it's going to basically be reflected in their students.
Absolutely. For something like math, so I'm hearing exactly what you're saying about connection with the teacher, because I've always felt that way. Even if it was a class that I didn't like that much, if I had a math teacher, and I was never a math guy, who was interesting and cool and had a sense of humor and connected with me about something outside of math, outside of school, I was all in on math. Yeah. Like, I would go to Miss Roche and do everything I needed to do, because not only I wanted to do well in that class, I wanted to do well for that teacher who I like. But I also, for humanities courses like history and English, I've always felt an intrinsic connection to that material in the first place. Right. Math and science, for me in high school especially, I never felt that intrinsic connection. What about for students? Like, how do you spin math in a way that forces students to say, all right, this is going to matter down the line for me. I'm learning objectives that are going to be important in the future. Because, to be honest, I've never done a calculus assignment or an equation since I left junior year math. Yeah. How do you kind of get them to buy in that this is important for your mental processes and your thinking, for years to come?
Well, and I think that's the key, right? So I think unfairly, math has been sort of reduced to computation, right? And I think if you pursue math really after you get through the calculus sequence, you'll find sort of what a misconception that is, right? So I, as a college math major, would go semesters without ever touching a number. And so there's this aspect of math where there are skills that are important, right? The same way in English, if you don't understand grammar, you can't write. Mm-hmm. But the goal of grammar is not to get good at grammar. The goal of grammar is to be able to communicate effectively. Mm-hmm. Right. So in math, we have these skills, and the goal of the skills is not to get really good at factoring polynomials, right? Or not to get really good at taking derivatives. It's this thinking process, right? So I would argue math is a way of thinking. It's a way of thinking really rigorously that you can apply to really almost any kind of future endeavor in your life. It's a way of, like, reading the newspaper as a mathematician means looking at people's arguments really carefully, and does the logic here hold, or is there something missing? I think it means structuring arguments in a certain way. Mm-hmm. And I think those skills really transcend the subject and apply, to tons of different things. When I graduated, I think about the people who were math majors with me. So a huge number of them went to NSA, which is very sort of technical, mathy stuff. But the second biggest group went to law school. And they went to law school because they were trained as really careful, critical thinkers. And that's what a college math major really is about, much more than, being able to solve a bunch of equations faster than somebody else.
Right. Yeah, and I always think of law school as kind of a track for an English major, and I never really thought of it for math too, but that completely makes sense because you're structuring different parts of equations to make a rational solution. There's one right answer.
Yeah.
Cool. Were you always, or go ahead.
No, go for it.
Did you always want to teach? Did you want to go to law school? Did you want to do something else?
No, I was going to fly fighter jets.
Really?
Everyone was in the 90s. And then I realized that that apparently you need perfect vision to be a pilot, and I was not really very close to that. So I thought the next best thing would be to design fighter jets. So I applied to college as an engineer, and went to a liberal arts school, and was really excited about being an engineer until, you get there and you meet with your advisor and class hasn't even started yet, and you go to make your schedule, and you go to a liberal arts school, at least I did, because I was interested in all these different areas, and so this was going to be great. I was going to get to study engineering, but also take classes in history and take classes in religion and take classes in these other subjects that to me are really interesting. And my advisor handed me my schedule for the next 4 years, with all the classes filled in. And I said, well, this, totally defeats the purpose of coming to school here. Like, if I wanted to just take engineering classes, I would have gone to an engineering school, but I chose to come here. And he said, well, at Swarthmore, you can take the classes you want unless you're an engineer. And if you're an engineer, then we choose them for you, basically. So I asked him, what's the closest thing to engineering where I can still take the classes I want? And he said it's a tie between math and physics. So took a math class, took a physics class, took a history class, and a philosophy class. Not my thing. And you talked about teachers earlier. Loved my math teacher. Had one of these transformational math teachers, a guy named Kai Campbell. And couldn't stand my physics teacher, and became a math teacher literally because of him.
Isn't that crazy how you have one teacher, like my physics teacher sophomore year, if I didn't like, him or her, I don't like physics. Yeah. It's crazy. Yeah. So it really is in such an important job as a teacher, because you completely changed your track from engineering to math and physics to just math because of the teacher.
Because of that one guy. Now, I was fortunate. I had fantastic math teachers when I was here, but that's how I ended up on the engineering track. What got me on the math as a college major track was him.
So you went to Swarthmore for
a year.
1 year. And then how did you get to Virginia? You went to Virginia.
Yeah, Virginia was I think in a lot of ways the anti-Swarthmore. Swarthmore just not the place for me. So it went from a very small, very liberal private school north of Baltimore to, in some sense the opposite, a pretty conservative, much bigger public school south of Baltimore.
Was your move from Swarthmore to Virginia because of the size of the school, because you weren't happy with their major, or was it sports? What really drove you to switch?
It was a lot of things, right? So, so Swarthmore, got rid of their football program when I was there, which was hard. But I think even that aside, it just wasn't the right place for me. I think the sort of the scene there, the way, I'm not sure. I just, it's really the only time in my life I felt like I legitimately didn't fit in. And it didn't matter what I would have done, like I wasn't going to fit in. It's the only time in my life that I was negatively labeled as an athlete, right? And with the sense that, like, because you're an athlete, like, you don't belong here. And it didn't matter how well I did in my classes, and it didn't matter how much I participated in class, right? Like I couldn't shed that label. And it made me sort of self-conscious and self-aware in a way that wasn't good. Now, frankly, I learned more in my 9 months there than I learned any other time in my life. And I think has really made me way more empathetic with people sort of in minority groups, right? So very different, obviously, being a football player at Swarthmore than it was, to be a Black American, that was in 2000. And yet, on a much sort of less pervasive scale, I think I felt some of the things that they've felt, right? That something about the way I looked, something about the way I walked made people judge me in a way that was very out of touch with the way I viewed myself. And I think largely unfair.
Totally unfair, especially coming from a place like Gilman, which sports and athletics go hand in hand. Like if you're on a team, you're supposed to be on a team, right? Everyone's supposed to play sports. Sports are virtuous at Gilman.
Right.
And if you go somewhere where sports are kind of, you're looking at someone who's very much academic and loves school and is a math major as lesser because they're on the football team, right? That can definitely make you feel like that, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was hard.
So Virginia, what was that like going to UVA after? So you stay on that math track there?
Yeah, so I was a math and history double major there, and again, right, the contrast between those two departments was for me really great. So on one hand, one is all reading and writing, and the other is all critical thinking, and that was good for me. Just thinking about my day, being able to kind of go back and forth and not be doing the same thing. But the history program there is huge. It's one of the biggest majors. And the math program was tiny. And so it was nice to have both, right? To be able to go into the math building, which was in a converted ROTC dorm and still had showers in the bathroom and spray paint stenciled numbers on the door, and literally know every single person in the building because there were so few of us, and then be able to go even as an upperclassman into a history class and know a third of the people because the history program was so big, and there are also so many people who were not history majors taking, right? So no non-math major is taking, abstract algebra 3, right? But there are plenty of non-history majors that want to take, American Civil War, and so. I think those sort of two very different major experiences were healthy for me, and really showed, I think, different sides, different aspects of the university.
Yeah, it's very rare to have a math major who's also involved in history too.
Yeah, although one of my really good friends was a math English double major, so you can do it.
You can do it.
Yeah, and I had one class that I could count for both degrees, which was good. A class called History of Mathematics. Which was perfect for me.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that could be an elective here at Gilman, History of Math.
Yeah, so we got a history of science, which is pretty similar. And again, we've talked about transformative teachers. A wonderful teacher who actually had tenure in both departments. So a woman named Karen Partial, who taught math and history, at UVA, at this prestigious university, right? And I mean, I think especially as a woman, pretty remarkable accomplishment in that era.
So what led you from your interest in math to back to Gilman to teach? Like, how did you get into teaching after you were involved in math, you're involved in football and history? How did you get back here?
Yeah, so I think, pretty roundabout road. I think in the immediate term, I was pretty hard to manage as a high schooler. I think certainly for my parents and also probably for my teachers and coaches. And I think came to realize in college what a gift they'd given me, and almost got into teaching almost from a sense of guilt, right? Like I've done such a disservice to these people who've dedicated their lives to helping people like me, and that the only way I can possibly like begin to get the like cosmic balance sheet back to even is to try to provide that experience for some other people. And that certainly got me in the door. It turns out that that kind of energy isn't going to keep you in the business very long. And so started teaching actually in Nashville, a school called Montgomery Bell Academy.
Can I ask you a quick question about that before we talk about Montgomery Bell? So was there like a moment when you were at UVA or that struck you that these teachers at Gilman had done this service for you or had helped you, and now you wanted to do that? Was there a certain time that happened, or was that just gradual realization for you?
So I don't remember the sort of lightning bolt moment. I did all 3 summers in college. I worked at residential summer educational programs, right? So we worked with a program here called Upward Bound. Bill Greene ran it, and it's a federal program, but it basically takes low income and first generation college bound students and gives them support, basically tutoring during the school year. And then I forget if it was 4 weeks or 5 weeks or 6 over the summer, an actual residential program. We lived in the dorms over at Notre Dame College and did classes here during the day. And so the 2 summers there were really transformative. Actually living on dorm with students who first off, very close in age. So I would have been 19 and they're, 15, 16, 17, and geographically incredibly close, right? So from my house to their house, you're talking 2 miles, 3 miles, and yet our life experiences, it would be hard to imagine, more fundamentally different childhoods. And so not just to work with them a little bit, but to actually be with them 24 hours a day, right? To eat our meals together, to share a bathroom, to be on the same hall of a dorm building, to go to class together. That was a really important experience for me. First off, to understand kind of how good I had it, right? Like in a lot of ways, how nice my childhood was, but also to see the kind of shared humanity that we have as people, that's so much more important than the way we look or where we live or what school we go to, or what our parents do. That was a really important time for me becoming an educator.
For sure. And so going into your senior year, you kind of knew that this was the path that you wanted to go down, was the education path and continuing with teaching.
Definitely. By the time I was an upperclassman, I was that's what I was going to do.
And then Montgomery Bell was next. That was the next step. That's in Nashville. I was talking to Johnny Foreman the other day, and he was telling me he was down in Nashville for some convention or something, and he ran into Jeff Gouline. He's like, Jeff Gouline, what are you doing down here at Montgomery Bell? You got to come back to Gilman.
Yeah, it's funny. You talked about kind of role of chance in our lives earlier. So was working with a placement agency trying to get a teaching job, and pretty early in the process. And I'd sort of set pretty narrow geographic bounds. So I wanted to be basically in Baltimore, Annapolis, DC, Richmond, Philadelphia, someplace like that. And they said, you really ought to look at this job in Nashville. And I basically told them, I'm going to go and like do it as a practice interview. Like they're going to fly me out there. It's going to be my first time like on a plane going to a job interview. I'm going to spend the night, right? That's a very different thing than going someplace for the day. It's a really good school. I'm going to get to teach some mock classes. I'm going to do it, and just for the experience, and go out there and sort of a whirlwind kind of 36 hours and end up getting a job offer literally before I got on the plane to go home. And so the first question always is, so how long do I have to think about this? And the headmaster there, a guy named Brad Julius, said, well, normally we give people 48 hours, but we're going to give you 72 or something. Like, we're going to be really generous with you. Like, you've got 3 days to think about like the future of your life. And it was I think over spring break. So I think I came straight back to Baltimore. And by the time I got home, I had really decided that was what I was going to do, and told my parents then that I was going to be
Nashville.
Moving to a very different part of the country.
Sounds amazing. I need to get to Nashville, but
it's a very cool town.
What's Montgomery Bell? I was looking up some pictures. It looks like a really cool school.
It's incredible. Yeah. So Gilman-ish, and so it has the kind of Gilman role in.
Is it all boys?
All boys. 7 through 12. Old. So 1860s founding. And conservative. The most conservative. So far fewer independent schools in Nashville than in Baltimore, but that's the conservative one. That's the one where, your sports are really important and school is really important. It's the same architecture, right? It's the kind of like Georgian, brick buildings, white columns. On the surface, it really felt very much like Gilman. I think the more I was there, the more I realized in a lot of ways probably not very much like Gilman. But if you walked around for 10 minutes there and you walked around for 10 minutes here, you'd feel a lot of the same things.
Was Gilman not an option for you when you were looking for a job? Did you try to come back to Gilman immediately, or was it Montgomery Bell?
So didn't have the fellowship programs then, and didn't have an opening at the time, a math opening. And I really wanted to come back to Baltimore. I thought about working at McDonald, thought about working at Loyola. I got the MBA job really quickly, and so didn't even really have time to apply here. And at the time was maybe disappointed to be going away. I think as a 22-year-old, the worst thing I could have done was come straight back here.
Yeah.
It would have been too comfortable, and I would have had too much trouble differentiating between myself as a former student of much of the faculty, myself as a sibling of many of the friends of siblings of many of the students.
Yep.
I didn't know enough about teaching. I wasn't good enough at it then. And that would have been, it's what I wanted, and it shouldn't have been, right? It would have been really bad for me. So I was out there for 2 years, had an unbelievable experience, had really two remarkably kind and generous mentors who really taught me how to teach and frankly welcomed me into their family, right? So my department chair, has a son my age, and I was at his house for Thanksgiving because there wasn't enough time to come home. And so he had me over, right? And I would go to his house to watch the Super Bowl. And I would, those smaller holidays when there isn't enough time to travel, it was just an open invitation. I went with him. And that, as somebody kind of starting living, on my own for the first time, paying my own bills, meant so much.
Yeah.
And by the way, an incredible master math teacher and a football coach. And right, we had so much overlap in terms of our lives and our interests, and basically just followed him around like a little puppy dog, trying to learn as much as I could.
Was your experience teaching for the first time, even though you had a mentor and someone to kind of take you under their wing?
Yeah.
Were you kind of thrown into the classroom with to make your own syllabus and figure it out on your own, or was everything kind of predetermined from your mentor?
No, they gave me a book.
Gave you a book and said, go teach.
First week of June, yeah. So I was lucky. I taught summer school the summer leading up to it, and so I at least got to meet some people and spend some time on campus. But one of my strongest memories, right? So you think about like my first whatever. And you build it up in your mind. And I remember I had freshman geometry in the room, like directly above the faculty room with these kids. So they're clueless too, right? They're freshmen. They have no idea. And we sort of kind of awkwardly go in the room, and we're all staring at the clock waiting for it to get to 8 o'clock. And it gets to 8 o'clock. And I wanted so badly to say something really profound, right? Like, this is going to be my first words as a real teacher. And it was something like, "Welcome to geometry class. My name is Jeff Gouline," right? Like the most horrible thing. And I don't know what I should have said, but it shouldn't have been that.
It's a lot of pressure to put on yourself for the first words out of your mouth. I'm sure every teacher said.
I guess. I don't know. And it's funny. Being a new teacher teaching freshmen is so much fun, right? Because you come in together and clueless. Mm-hmm. And that group really grew up. We grew up together.
Yeah.
And the same thing, frankly, happened when I came back here and I was a new Gilman teacher. My closest student relationships are with the 2010s because they were freshmen my first year back. And that experience of learning together, me as a newish teacher, new on Gilman's faculty, and them as new high school students, kind of both of us going through those waters together was really fun and something I've not been able to recreate sort of as an older teacher.
So was Johnny Foreman's trip to Montgomery, was that when you were kind of sucked back to Gilman, or was
I'm
it
not sure if I can, so
other factors?
I'm not sure if I can use names in this story. I got a phone call from a close, so Eva Turner was the head of the high school at Gilman at the time, and I got a phone call from a close friend of hers basically saying, there's a math job at Gilman. It hasn't been publicized yet, but she'd sort of like for you to apply, like wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to come back. Now I was terrified of the head of MBA, and was nervous that if he knew that I was looking for other jobs, that was going to come back on me and like reflect poorly on me as a as an employee basically. And so I applied like literally secretly. It was like early cell phone days, and I would during my free period go off like into the woods on campus and do my interviews on my phone in the woods, and told the folks at Gilman that I basically couldn't come back to interview because I didn't think I could miss any school out there. And there were no breaks coming up. And so did the whole thing, it was, I don't like being like sneaky. Mm-hmm. And I felt like I was being sneaky during that. It was probably about a week or 10-day period. And I'd never met the headmaster, John McGill, and he took a chance on me. And that was really meaningful, having the opportunity to come back and work under those circumstances. Certainly felt kind of honored. Mm-hmm. But that's how it happened.
That's the story. So 2 years at Montgomery. And then you came back in 2010.
Well, it would have been 2006, 2007. So the class of 2010.
Oh, okay. So
those kids,
gotcha.
Their freshman year was 2006, 2007.
And you were teaching in the math department, coaching football
and baseball at the time.
What was it like coming back to Gilman, where there's probably a fair number of your old teachers here with you now as colleagues?
Yeah. Unbelievably meaningful and very, very humbling. So some of the teachers were very warm to me and were very clear kind of from the start, like, you're my colleague now. Don't call me sir. Don't call me ma'am. Like, I'm whatever. And I think that was harder for me than it was for them to make that adjustment. But had some really important role models of mine that I was teaching and coaching with, including one, like, literally in my office, and tried just as much as I could just to listen, right? And to be like in proximity to them and watch and hear how they taught and how they coached, and just trying to gather as much information in as I could. Certainly in those early years, that was really meaningful. It was, you're working with, in a lot of cases, like the people you idolize as a kid. Mm-hmm. And that was hard, really, really humbling to do.
Mm-hmm. Were there any coaches or teachers, and I've said this before, that even coaches that I've had who I didn't maybe even like that much, now that I'm coaching and teaching, I kind of feel myself repeating or conceptualizing things that they said as true, even if you didn't like the coach that much in college or whatever. Some of their lines and some of their quotes are very much true that have rubbed off on me, and those are coaches and teachers that maybe I didn't like that much, but they're teachers that I love, that I've kind of implemented into my style now as a teacher and coach. Do you ever find yourself repeating or using philosophies or quotes from teachers and coaches that you've had over the years?
So I think I've pulled more from people I like than people I dislike.
Yep.
Ruthie Williams was my junior year math teacher, and I had two incredible math teachers junior year, senior year here, and they couldn't have been more different, right? So Ruthie was like the warmest teacher you could possibly have, right? So she had this bulletin board in the classroom, and it was just covered with stuff about us that had nothing to do with math, right? So, she'd pull clippings out of the newspaper. She'd have pictures of us playing in games, or playing an instrument or performing, things from our homes. And I the tradition for me of baking cookies for my advisees on their birthday, right? I stole from her. And I wasn't her advisee, but I'd come to school on my birthday and she'd have a brownie for me. And even as a teacher, when I came back, she remembered. And the 2 years we worked together, would very sort of like nonchalantly leave a birthday card in my mailbox. And she made me feel so welcomed and so encouraged. And that she's influenced me incredibly heavily as a teacher in terms of how I interact with students on things that don't deal with, on like non-content areas, right? I want to be just like Ruthie. I want my students to feel as wanted as she made me feel when I was a student. So then the following year was probably the best math teacher I've ever had, a woman named Lorraine Hutchinson. And she was maybe 90 pounds and terrifying. I mean, she was one of those teachers that, like, you got into class and you were like afraid to like be sitting the wrong way, or like afraid to like have your pencil on the wrong side of your desk. Like everything had to be just so. And yet somehow so on one hand, right, we're all scared to death of her. And on the other hand, like there's no doubt in any of our minds that this woman cares about us on an unbelievably deep level, and just has a very different way maybe of showing it than Ruthie did. And learned so much from her about having really clear expectations and really high expectations. And that she told us, right, there was no negotiating, there was no back and forth. This is what I expect from you, and you're going to do it. And it worked, right? I mean, all of us performed in that class at an incredibly high level, because, so first off, she's an excellent teacher, but also part of that was her being really clear and really demanding of us as students. And I think that contrast between the two is something that stuck with me as I've grown up as a teacher.
Yeah. Well, both examples are awesome. And the second example might be more of what I mean by like a teacher that during the time when you had him or her as a teacher, it's like, why does my pencil have to be straight? Why am I so scared of this woman? Why is she expecting all these details to be perfect? And then a couple years later, you're in that position and you're realizing, because they matter, the details matter, and the little things matter. And that strict teacher that I had was right all along.
Well, the best example of that, my advisor was a guy named Peter Julius, and he was chair of the history department, and he taught me freshman, sophomore, and junior year. And the freshman history class was really pretty easy, but sophomore year I was in a AP European history class with a bunch of seniors, and I was way over my head. as an underclassman in with those guys, and it didn't matter. It seems like what I wrote, he never liked it. Like it was just impossible for me to write a good essay for him. And in my mind, right, and this is like a perfect like 15 or 16-year-old mind, like, can't you give me an advisee discount? Like, can't you just like, don't give me an A, just like give me not the worst grade on my report card by like a full 6 point. Like, it shouldn't be 6 points lower than my next worst grade. And the answer was like unequivocally no.
Yeah.
Like this is the standard and just meet it. And I worked harder in that class than I've worked in any other class I've taken. And raised my grade a ton in the second semester. So still my lowest grade, but I like managed to close the gap. And that's probably, first off, the grade I'm proudest of ever in my life, because I had to work so hard for it. And second, again, didn't realize it at the time, but he taught me to read and write. Like, not like I could read the symbols, right? And I could like write sentences, but he's the one who actually taught me to do it well. And took his class again senior year. And at that point knew what I was getting into, and just loved it. And we've stayed in touch. We talked a half hour. I finish my Saturday morning runs when he's walking on the track.
That's great.
And so a lot of times I'll finish up and go and we'll walk together. And an unbelievably impactful teacher. And what, not much more important than being able to read and write. And he taught me more about that than anybody else.
How did he teach you to read and write? When you say he taught you to read and write, was it he pushed you to look closer at what you were reading, or pointed out specific details about it, or how did such a strict mentality translate to teaching reading and writing?
Which is funny, because if you met him, strict would not be the word you would associate with him.
He was a tough grader.
Really tough grader. So we had the same, everything we read, the essay prompt was always the same. And the essay prompt was, why did this person take the time to write this thing? And I'd never thought about, so first off, I didn't understand why we were reading fiction in a history class. Mm-hmm. But I'd never thought about books through that perspective, mm-hmm. right? So like putting one of these things together takes, I'm sure, like thousands of hours of work, right? And they could do all these other things, and yet this person chose to sit down and write these words. And it was our job as the reader to figure out why. Mm-hmm. And what it meant was that it caused me not just to think about like the story that the author is telling, but really think about, there's got to be some deeper meaning, mm-hmm. right? We're not reading hop on pop, right? We're reading something that the author thought was really important, that person's trying to send a message to us as the reader, and that it's our job as the reader kind of to play detective and to figure out what are the words between the words, right? The lines between the lines. And that was what taught me how to read. Mm-hmm. And then in terms of writing was to get those thoughts and convey them in a way that was convincing to somebody else, right? So now I'm wearing that hat right now. I'm choosing to write a paper about this particular book, and like, because Mr. Julius said so is not a good enough like reason to be sitting down and writing. There had to be something deeper. Mm-hmm. And that was really impactful. Yeah, in terms of my thought process.
Those two things go hand in hand, the reading part and the writing part, because if you're not thinking about why this author wrote what he or she wrote in this book or this story, you're not going to think those things when you sit down to write. You're just going to do it for exactly what you said at the beginning of the episode. It was just to check the box. Yeah. That's pretty cool. Are there other teachers here now that maybe you had as a student, that like teachers or coaches who taught you when you were here?
So still a handful around. So I was Dallas Jacobs. I was in his first class when he came to Gilman. And that I was in sophomore geometry. That was fun. Joe Duncan taught me twice, sophomore and junior year. And it's funny, kids are so scared of him, I feel like. And my class, at least, we had a blast. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know. We did not find him scary, but we certainly enjoyed that time together. And there are a fair number of others. We've had so many retirements in the last maybe 2 or 3 years. I've lost a bunch of former teachers. Lost is the wrong word. Had a bunch of former teachers retire in that time.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, I do want to get to your character program here at Gilman for people, and that was just getting started last year, right? Maybe?
Yeah. What a crazy time to start it.
Crazy time to start it, but the 2 or 3 sessions that we had as a lacrosse program last spring were incredible, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you started that and what that's all about.
Yeah, so I think kind of two thought processes kind of came together. When I was a player here, the character education program was really closely intertwined in the football program, right? So that was a hugely important part of what we did as a team. It was probably a 10-minute segment of practice every day, literally, 5 days a week in practice. And then we had about a 30 or 40-minute session before games. And Joe Ehrmann ran them and pulled a ton of influence from him. Now his personality is very different than mine. He's a significantly better public speaker than I am. He has a more powerful and I think moving life story than I have. But the idea or the seed probably got planted there. The second influence is I got to a point as a coach where I'd won so many big games and lost so many big games, and frankly had accomplished more as a coach in terms of like quantitative accomplishments, right? Like things I could put on a piece of paper than I ever thought I would. And recognized that that's not why I teach, right? Like I don't teach so that we can run around after a game and celebrate. And I don't teach so that we can, have a trophy in the case or put a championship banner up in the arena. And that I teach because I want to help the players and help my students develop into the people that they want to be. And that as a coach, I think I'd lost sight of that. I became much too invested and much too interested in the scoreboard and too divested in their well-being as humans. And so those two things kind of came together and made me think, well, why don't I do both of these things, right? Why don't I take some of those ideas that Joe brought when Tim Holly was the football coach, Johnny Foreman ran something similar, take some of the stuff that he developed, pull some ideas from other people, some on campus, some not, that I really respect, bring them together and then build a program that can be something that all the athletes here at Gilman share. Because one of the things that's hard as an athlete is you almost never get to watch your classmates play, right? So like as a football player here, I never got to see a soccer. As a baseball player, right, the only lacrosse I got to watch was between innings. I'd be out in right field and like watching it used to be the baseball and lacrosse fields were next to each other and like watching under the scoreboard what was going on in the lacrosse game. I
just a couple plays, you don't really get to see everything.
Exactly. I may be the only kid ever to graduate from Gilman who never watched a like start to finish lacrosse game. Mm-hmm. And it was because everything conflicted with baseball, and that this could be something that would be common for all the kids who were playing sports, that they could have a shared experience that I think they want, but that their schedules prevent them from having.
Mm. What are some of those lessons that you try to emphasize or convey in this program?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is I don't ever want to tell a kid what to do, right? I don't want to tell him what he should be when he grows up. And I think what I've tried really hard to do is ask questions that they've not been asked before. and ask questions that are sometimes personal questions where they're looking inside themselves, and also questions where they're looking at the world around them, whether that's looking at their family, whether that's looking at their friends, looking at role models, looking sometimes at negative role models, to get them to look really carefully at those interactions and to think, what are things that I like and therefore things that I want to try to develop in myself? And what are things that I dislike and things that I need to work to avoid?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is, big overarching principle. What I'm trying to do is to get them to think really deeply about themselves, about how they relate to the people around them, both on their team and in other sort of groups. And then, try to work towards those goals, work towards that better version of themselves.
No, but that's interesting because we were watching some Joe Rogan before the podcast just to get an idea of what a podcast is. And I was watching last night. One of my favorite guests of all time that Rogan has on his podcast is Jordan Peterson. And I don't know if you know much about Jordan Peterson's one of like my favorite guys because he puts a lot of his. He's a professor, a psychology professor at University of Toronto, and he's had books come out recently, and he's kind of become famous later in his life. But anyway, on the first episode of the podcast with Jordan Peterson, maybe it's not the first one. He's had him on a couple times, but maybe the second episode with Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan, one of my favorite kind of stories that Peterson tells, and I'm not sure he's an athlete himself, but he's got the psychological piece, and he talks about character in sports. And he tells this story, and I'll send you the clip after, of his son is playing in a championship hockey game. And it's a really good game. Both teams are pretty equally matched. His son's team has a star player on the team. And the other team comes down at the end of the game, scores a goal. His son's team loses 4-3, and that was it. And it was a good game. It was good competition. Just turned out that way. And the best player on his son's team comes off the hockey rink and throws his helmet and smashes his, hockey, hockey stick. And the dad and the parents come over, and instead of like saying, "Dude, like clean your act up and handle a loss the right way. It was a good game anyway. Be good parents." The parents are like, "Yeah, the ref blew that game. Like you're an all-star. You guys deserve to win. That was BS, whatever." And Jordan Peterson's point is he talks about how when parents and coaches say it's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. There's like a deep ethic in that line. And what it is you're playing sports, you're training for life pretty much, because life is a series of games or a series of championships.
Yeah.
And if you show up to a game and you act like that, no one's going to want to play with you ever again. Like you're not going to be invited to games. You're not going to be coached. No one's going to want to play with you. So that quote, "It's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game," is to set yourself up for the series of games that life is. And that's how you really become a winner or a champion in life, is you know how to handle yourself through those character values that you try to instill in your program by practicing in games, like handling yourself through winning or losing the right way, sharing the ball, not being a diva on the ice hockey team, playing the right way.
I think it's interesting, frankly, that in America, athletic teams are part of academic institutions, right? So, and it's always struck me a little bit weird, like, why does Gilman have a lacrosse team? Like, why does Gilman have a football team? Why isn't that something separate, right? Because I think if the goal really is sport-specific skill development, and if the goal really is winning, then athletics should be something that's separate from an educational institution. But so long as those things are operating under the umbrella of a school, the goal has got to be education rather than winning. And I would argue, right, if you do things the right way, then you're going to win a lot of games. But that winning should be the byproduct of doing things properly and not the goal unto itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that certainly working at a place like this, and certainly thinking about the role of athletics in our life here at school, we have to keep in mind that we are a school, and that when we go out to practice, tomorrow afternoon at 4:00, that we're teachers, right? And we should be teaching. And certainly it's going to look different on the track or on the lacrosse field or on the basketball court than it will in the English classroom. But that still we need to be teaching students something that's valuable beyond, I'm going to make you run faster,
mm-hmm.
and beyond, right, I'm going to get your shot more efficient or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not the product, it's the process. It's not the result, it's the process. It's you're refining your character through sports.
Right. Oh, and also through math class, and also through English class, right? I mean, you don't read Shakespeare because you're going to be a Shakespeare scholar, right? You said earlier you seem to have grown to being a perfectly functioning adult without doing any calculus.
I haven't touched it.
Right. You don't learn calculus to become a calculus expert. You learn calculus as part of this growth in training your mind.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got to be the same with sports, or you need to pull sports out from out of academic institutions, and they need to be something separate, right? That if really the only thing that matters is winning and losing, then you need to go the route where they're professional teams, or where they're rec teams, or where the mission of those groups is to win football games.
And team sports are something that you maybe have more of a focus in, since you were you played team sports growing up?
Yeah, so I did. I came into running really late in life. I mean, I was grew up loving baseball,
mm-hmm.
and then realized I wasn't all that good at it, and sort of became more of a football focused guy, and so I certainly played team sports. That's my experience. Although in a lot of ways, the individual sports have incredibly close bonds within those teams. I mean, if you go out, and the cross country team and the swimming team are two of the closest groups on campus. I think those are really hard. Wrestling too. Those are really hard sports.
Mm-hmm.
And even though they're quote unquote individual sports, I think those kids have a shared experience that matters to them,
mm-hmm.
right? Like I know how hard you worked to get to where you are. And that even though, we don't have a ball and I can't pass it to you, I have an unbelievable amount of respect because I see what you put in practice that people never see mm-hmm. when they just show up and watch you play in games.
Do you speak to those individuals? Do you speak to the swimming team too?
Yeah.
Do you remodel your curriculum for individualized sports versus team sports at all?
Sometimes. I mean, I wish I had more experience. Last spring was certainly unusual.
Right.
And the fall, but with the fall, no. I mean, I think what I did with cross country was pretty similar to what I did with football, because they don't see themselves as individual sports.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you really talk to a cross country kid, right? If you really talk to Beck or Pete Heasters or one of those guys, I don't think they view their sport any differently than a football player would view his team, or a soccer player would view his team. I think that maybe is an outside projection on those groups.
When you were here at Gilman, did you kind of have a sense or realize the impact that playing team sports or playing sports in general would have on you going forward, or is that kind of realized later down the line for you?
No, I mean, definitely sports were really important to me coming through. My coaches were very, very important role models coming through. I keep in touch, frankly, with a lot of them. I was fortunate to have incredibly good and impactful coaches. And I certainly recognized those groups, those connections mattered. And that's why, by the way, I'm doing the character ed through athletic teams and not through math classes, mm-hmm. is that there's a sense of trust and there's a sense of shared purpose and value on teams that's very difficult to recreate in a classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the hardest things with talking about character, and this is one of the things we ran into with our Wednesday schedules, right? We want to have character ed, but if you don't walk into a group that already trusts each other,
or have a shared purpose.
Exactly. You can't get past the starting line. And so really I'm taking advantage of those existing, that kind of existing fertile ground to sort of overlay the lessons on top of them. And that's why, and this is, Joe Ehrmann talked about this all the time, that's why the role of a coach is so important. And that's why I've chosen that vehicle for the character education program, is because a lot of that foundation's already been built.
So going to Joe Ehrmann, I have never met him, but I have read Season of Life actually before I came to Gilman. So I do have a sense of him and some of the things that he emphasized here at Gilman. But what type of influence, you talked a little bit about it before, but what type of influence did his role and the football program here at Gilman have on you when you were a student athlete?
Yeah, I think so. An enormous influence. And he was probably the first person really to talk to me about like manhood as a structure, right? So I'd lived as a male my whole life, never thinking about what does it mean to be a man. And he spoke very directly. And this is one of the main differences between our approaches. He was very direct about this is what it means to be a man, and this is what it doesn't mean to be a man. And he spoke from a perspective of somebody, first off, who had sort of, gotten to the peak of masculinity, right? So this is, however many years, first round draft pick in the NFL, played professionally at 12 or 15 years, incredibly successful career as a football player, and that in our society in a lot of ways is the peak masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
and talked about his younger brother who died of cancer when Joe was getting started in the league, and how transformative that experience was on Joe in terms of recognizing the sort of emptiness of his life, right? So he was living the dream, right? He's playing for the Colts. He walks down the street, everybody knows who he is. He's got the house and the pool and and all this fame, and none of it could get his brother out of that hospital bed. Mm-hmm. And out of that tragedy and out of some tragedy in his own relationship with his father, I think grew this mission, I think is probably the right word for it, to educate boys to be men in this framework of being loving men and being supportive men and being men who care about the people around them, whether that's family members, whether that's teammates, whether that's co-workers, or even frankly strangers on the street. And that resonated a lot with me. It's something I'd never thought of before. Mm-hmm. What does it mean to be a man? And has been hugely impactful in the way I've tried to live my life and the way I see myself. That's been a standard that I've used to judge myself, even now more than 20 years later.
That's amazing. As a coach yourself now, and as part of the character ed program and a teacher and someone who's really, I would describe you as devoted and committed and just all in on Gilman and just raising boys and helping boys. You're very, even when I see you just at the table in Cary Hall, I'm just like, this is after the lunch, right? It's not really the time that you need to be doing that, but you open yourself up and you're like, hey, if you need math help, come see me. And you're on the track, you're on the basketball court, you're everywhere here helping young men become men, just as you said. Where does this motivation come from for you? Is it all of your experience? And you talked a little bit about maybe at first to get in the door here at Gilman, it was a little bit of the guilt, but now that you're here and this is your life, what continues to motivate you?
Yeah, well, we're servants. right? And I think people who are educators need to recognize that more than anything else, that's our job, that we serve the students who are here, and that's become my passion, I think, is finding ways to serve them. And sometimes that means giving them help in math, but for some of them, that's not what they need, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes they need, they're going through a tough patch at home and they just need someone to listen to them, mm-hmm. right? They just need someone to pick up the phone and not say anything and just let them speak, and listen non-judgmentally. And sometimes they need people to hold them accountable, mm-hmm. When they're not doing the things that they're doing. And that's what I think gets me out of bed every morning is this really strong sense of duty that I have to the young people who are here, that's my job, right? So my job really isn't to teach them pre-calculus, and my job isn't really to get them to win the 100-meter dash. That my job really is to be a support for them, to serve them, and to look out for their best interest. And that's what I try really hard to do every day, and certainly fail often, right? But that's my goal, right? That's what I'm trying to do here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it keeps you coming back every day. That duty will never die for you, right? It's like it's always there. Maybe it's not perfect every day, yeah. but you're opening yourself up to it as a teacher, as a coach, as a role model, like you are.
Well, I think that's true of any job. It's a job unless there's some deeper sense of purpose. Mm-hmm. And I think if there's a deeper sense of purpose, and it doesn't necessarily need to be, as a teacher, it can be a lot of things. But I think that's what drives people to do things well. We've talked about check boxes, right? This is the opposite of a checkbox, right? This is, I'm devoted, I'm committed, I'm duty bound to do these certain things, not because it's going to end up in my year-end report that Mr. Hubeck writes, and not because I'm going to get paid, $7 extra to do it, but because I feel a responsibility to this kid to help him with whatever it is he's trying to manage.
Yeah, unquantifiable. You can't put a price tag or a rating or a checkbox even on it. It's just a duty, a sense of purpose.
Yeah.
Awesome. Coach Gouline, you brought in a bunch of books. You brought in more books than any other guest has. So
math department, we're big readers.
I know, right? First math teacher on the podcast, and he brings 4 books.
Yeah.
Maybe we can choose one book today.
Yeah. Let's do.
They all look interesting.
Yeah. Well, right. I tried to bring good ones. Let's do this one, because I think this is probably the one that's most fitting with the conversation we've had.
Okay. Yeah. Great.
Do I hold it up?
Just to the camera. It's great.
Okay.
What is this?
Yeah, Heart is a Lonely Hunter, by Carson McCullers. And I think even we talked about chance. How I even came to this book is totally by chance. I've gotten started to enjoy art as sort of an adult, and was down at the BMA probably 3 or 4 years ago at this point, and there was an exhibit there, one of those traveling exhibitions, and I hated it. It's terrible. But one of the pieces was this backlit photograph of people in a submarine, so staged, and one of the people in the submarine was reading this book, and I was just so curious. I'm like, well, first of all, I don't like this at all, but there must be something about this book that's worth at least picking up and reading. And I'm not sure I've ever been as connected with or moved by a set of characters as I was with really, so 2 protagonists. One's a teenage girl, and the other is kind of a middle-aged deaf mute. I think I talked about him maybe in one of the lacrosse character ads.
Yep.
And I just felt every page I read, it felt like I was reading about me, or reading about me in the girl, the girl named Mick Kelly, which maybe is also interesting, that I would identify really strongly with a female character, and then the male character, the deaf muted guy, John Singer. In so many ways, he was the person I wanted to be, and to read through it and to see their lives sort of woven together was really powerful and changed the way I thought about myself in a way that books normally don't. And that was so like actually reading it was not just an enjoyable experience, but really a powerful experience and really a transformative experience for me, to think about how I fit into the context of the novel.
How did you rethink yourself through this book? What did you think about?
So Singer is a deaf mute, and so on the surface, right, really you would think limited, and yet he's the best listener in town. And that's what I talked about with the lacrosse team. And that's what I tried to take from him is here's a guy that biologically can't hear and biologically can't speak. And yet anyone in this little town in Georgia who's got a problem, they go to this little tiny apartment. He lives in the house where Mick, the girl, lives, rents out a room upstairs. And he communicates with his hands, right? So he signs and he writes. And yet when people speak to him, he actually sits on them. And he sits on them so he won't be tempted to interrupt them. And it's his way of being like totally present and totally engaged with the person that's speaking to him. And then when he responds, almost always he responds with a question. Right, or he responds with something rather than giving them advice. He responds by giving them something to think about, and so I think a lot of the kind of way the character ed program is developed is due to him, because he doesn't tell people what to do, and yet through these really carefully crafted responses, the people walk away almost knowing what it is they should do. But he gave them the space to find out for themselves. And so it's those goals, being an incredibly present and attentive listener. I'm really lucky, right? I can actually hear, but he has to really focus, right, to read lips. And then responding in a way that's going to let people sort of learn for themselves rather than just telling them what to do, were really powerful for me.
So important as a teacher too, because sometimes I catch myself just going off about something that I'm passionate about, that I like, that I'm noticing about the text that we're reading, especially on Zoom. They've been listening to this all day. They've been listening to people all day talk to them. The input is just coming at them from every direction. It's so much better. And I try to work on this, just ask a question, because that forces you to think and come up with your own answer.
Yeah, and I think oftentimes when students come to us with a concern, with a problem, our default reaction is to speak, when I think really it should be to listen, right? And rather than telling a kid, oh, when I was your age, this happened, or have you thought about this? Tell me more about what's going on. Talk to me more about what caused this problem. What's the background? Trying to get them to speak and get to the bottom of it sort of on their own, and with me as the listener rather than the speaker, I've found to be much more effective. And it certainly is something I'm working on as a teacher, as an educator.
Yeah, and just as a person, listening is so hard. A lot of people just jump to speak right away and respond right away. Yeah. There's a quote, Ernest Hemingway has a quote about listening that I really like. It's like, whenever someone's speaking to you, you're always thinking about what you're going to say next. Yeah. Most people never listen. Yeah. And it's true. It's like it's our default setting is what are we going to say next? How are we going to respond? But you're never fully there, present, listening. It's hard. It's a hard skill to build.
And I think, honestly, the response, certainly kids that are struggling emotionally, the response doesn't matter. What matters is that somebody took enough time to listen, and that you show you're caring through listening, not through speaking. that's where the power comes, is that this person cares deeply about me because he's going to sit quietly on the other end of the phone or on the other end of the room and let me talk about this thing that's really bothering me without making it about him. Mm-hmm. And that, it took me a really long time to learn. But that's what I'm trying to do now.
Excellent. And it comes from a book that you saw in the BMA in an installation that you didn't like. And now it's your book. I want to read it now.
It's good.
I'm going to check it out.
Cool.
Coach Gouline, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for coming on. And
thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. It was a great time. I thought you were going to bake some goods.
I'll bring some in next time.
That's on the next episode. Because I remember, I think it was last year, I went to your advisory for the first time, and you're cooking or you're baking, and then we were the album covers. We were trying to choose which album covers. That's something that we didn't get to much today. Is your advisory is pretty awesome.
Yeah, soon hopefully we'll be able to actually have advisory.
I know. Hopefully we'll be in the same room together. But
that'll be good.
What's your favorite thing to bake?
To bake or to eat?
To bake. I think you did banana bread, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I make it's like a I call it apple pot pie. So basically imagine like apple pie filling covered with like a sweet biscuit dough and baked in a loaf pan.
Sounds delicious.
It's a lot of fun.
Wow. How about to eat? What's your favorite thing to eat?
So I think my favorite of the things I bake, so I make so like white chocolate macadamia nut cookies are fairly common. So imagine those, but with toasted almonds instead of the macadamia nuts, and in a brownie form instead of a cookie, is probably my favorite to eat. But like horribly, it's like a sugar bomb. It's like not good.
It's a treat.
Yeah, very much a treat.
It's the end of the day. It's the end of a full day on Zoom.
There you go.
You got to have a treat.
Yeah.
Coach Gouline, thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.